My name is Maeve Ellison, 34 years old. The room went silent the moment the lawyer said the words, his only granddaughter. It wasn't the gentle, respectful kind of silence you hear at funerals. It dropped hard and heavy, like something invisible had just shattered in midair and everyone was waiting to see where the pieces landed. I felt dozens of eyes swing toward me at once, sharp as laser sights. I was standing near the back of the conference room, still in my Marine Corps service uniform, hands clasped behind my back out of habit, trying to look as unobtrusive as a Marine could look in a room full of grieving officers and impatient relatives. But suddenly, every gaze locked onto me. The lawyer looked up from the thick binder in front of him and stared straight at me. Not past me, not near me, at me. "Sergeant Ellison," he asked, his voice calm but carrying, "do you know who your biological parents are?" For a second, the question was so absurd that I honestly thought he was speaking to someone behind me. My throat tightened. The polished hardwood floor seemed to tilt in a slow, seismic shift, like the first tremor before a quake. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I had come to the will, reading out of respect, nothing more. I hadn't expected anything beyond maybe a brief mention in the part where they thanked the medical staff who had taken care of the general in his last illness. I certainly hadn't expected whatever this was supposed to be. I was no one important. I was just a Marine who happened to be assigned to him near the end. Just the nurse who monitored his meds and checked his vitals at 2 a.m. I forced myself to square my shoulders, to breathe through the spike of adrenaline. Marines don't flinch in front of a crowd. That's what I told myself. But inside, something old and fragile was starting to crack open. The morning had been painfully normal until that sentence detonated. I'd driven to the law office in my beat-up blue pickup, the same one I'd had since Camp Pendleton, and parked between a spotless black SUV and a Lexus that probably cost more than everything I owned. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and old money. I'd ridden the elevator with a cluster of older officers in their dress uniforms, their rows of ribbons and medals flashing under the recessed lights. Most of them had known General Walker for decades. They nodded politely, but their eyes said the rest. "Why are you here?" When the elevator doors opened, I followed them into a large conference room centered around a polished mahogany table that looked like it had hosted treaty negotiations. Framed photographs lined the walls, the general shaking hands with presidents, pinning medals on younger soldiers, hosting international delegations. I did what I always do in unfamiliar rooms. I took a seat near the back where I could observe without being observed. Then the family arrived. Nephews, cousins, spouses, and plus ones. People who looked related only by blood and by the identical expression of impatient entitlement plastered on their faces. They filled the air with loud greetings, forced laughter, and sighs that made it clear they weren't there to mourn. They were there to collect. I could smell their perfume, their cologne, their expectation. When the lawyer, Mr. Daniels, finally walked in, carrying a thick binder and an expression of professional neutrality, the room snapped into a restless quiet. He began reading through the will, donations to charities, small bequests to former staff, nods to old comrades from the general's long career. I listened respectfully, expecting nothing, wanting nothing. This, I thought, was my last duty to the man I'd cared for. And then he turned to the final section. "His only granddaughter," he read, and the air vanished from my lungs. As the weight of those words settled, his next question carved straight into the part of me I spent my life keeping covered. "Sergeant Ellison, do you know who your biological parents are?" Biological parents. The phrase echoed inside my skull like someone had dropped a metal tray in a quiet hospital corridor. Every eye in the room was still on me, weighing, judging. My face burned, the way it always did when a question cut too close. Did I know who my biological parents were? Yes and no. I knew my mother. I knew the tired eyes she hid behind cheap drugstore mascara, the way she rubbed circles on my back when nightmares jerked me awake, the way she worked double shifts so I could afford textbooks and application fees. She came home smelling like floor cleaner and dish soap, kicked off her shoes with a groan, and still found a smile for me. But my father? He was a blank line, a smudge in the story, a topic that slammed every conversational door. When I was little and dared to ask, she always gave the same answer, her expression closing down like a storm shutter. "He wasn't ready to be a parent," she'd say. "But we're fine. We have each other. That's enough." When she died, I thought the questions died with her. Now, in a room crowded with starched uniforms, designer suits, and relatives who looked ready to claw each other apart over whatever was in that binder, I stood pinned in place, unsure if the ground under my boots was still the same ground I'd walked in on. "Do you?" Mr. Daniels prompted gently. I took a breath that barely reached my lungs. "No," I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't. Not really." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the general's nephews, a heavy-set man in an expensively tailored suit, let out a loud, disgusted snort. "Then what on earth is she doing here?" he snapped. "She was just the nurse. This is ridiculous." Just the nurse. I'd heard variations of that line for years. Just the nurse. Just the help. Just the person changing dressings at 2 in the morning while everyone else slept. I'd learned to let the words slide over me during long shifts with difficult families and arrogant patients. But this time they dug in, because this time they were attached to a secret with my name tangled in it. Mr. Daniels lifted his hand. "We'll get to that," he said firmly. "Sergeant Ellison, if you'll stay until we finish the formal reading, I'll explain everything I can afterwards. General Walker was very specific about your presence here. Very specific." The phrase sat wrong in my stomach, heavy and sour. Very specific. I sank back into my chair, the eyes slowly peeling away from me as he went back to reading. My mind did what it always did when anyone mentioned my real family. It went backward. I was 9 again, in our narrow second-floor apartment above the laundromat, the building trembling every time a truck rumbled past. Mom was at work, and I was digging in her closet, looking for coloring books or old magazines. Instead, I found a plain cardboard box shoved behind a row of worn-out shoes. Inside were faded photographs, yellowed envelopes, and a hospital bracelet with tiny black letters stamped on it. Not Ellison, Harris. When Mom walked in and saw me holding the bracelet, the color drained from her face so fast it scared me. "Where did you get that?" she asked, sharper than I'd ever heard her. "In your closet," I said. "Is this mine? Why does it say Harris?" She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and gently, but firmly, took it from my hand. For a moment, she just stared at it, her mouth pressed into a thin line, like the bracelet was a live wire. She wasn't sure how to put down. "That's just an old mistake," she said finally. "Paperwork. It doesn't matter." "But—" She shoved the box back into the closet and shut the door with a soft final click. Then she knelt until we were eye to eye. "Maeve, listen to me," she said quietly. "You are my daughter. I am your mother. That's what matters. Some things in the past don't help us. They just hurt. Do you understand?" I didn't. Not really. But I could see how scared she was, and I loved her more than I loved any answer. So I nodded. After that, I stopped asking direct questions. The curiosity didn't disappear. It just went underground. I noticed the way she flinched at thick envelopes in the mail, how she tore some letters in half without opening them, how she changed the subject whenever grandparents or cousins came up in other people's stories. We never visited extended family for holidays. There were no old family photos on the walls. No, when you were little stories from anyone but her. It was just us, an island of 2. Years later, after her lungs finally gave out from cleaning chemicals and secondhand smoke, I went through her things again, hunting for that box. It was gone. So were the papers, the bracelet, the photographs. All she left was a note tucked inside her worn Bible. "Forgive yourself, forgive me, keep going." Back then, I assumed she meant the ordinary grief. Forgive myself for not saving her. Forgive her for leaving me alone. Sitting now in that gleaming conference room with the general's relatives muttering around me and the words, "his only granddaughter," still ringing in my ears, the note felt heavier, like it belonged to a secret that hadn't finished unraveling. What exactly had she done that needed that kind of forgiveness? "Sergeant Ellison." Mr. Daniels' voice pulled me back. The reading was over. Chairs scraped. Voices rose, sharp with outrage. I realized I hadn't heard a single word of the last few pages. I stood automatically. "Yes?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "If you'll stay for a few minutes," he said, "I'll explain why General Walker wanted you here. There are things you need to see." My heart started pounding again. I looked around at the furious faces, at the people who had clearly expected a very different ending to this story, and I understood something simple and terrifying. Whatever this was, my life was not going back to normal after today. Mr. Daniels led the way out of the conference room, his hand resting lightly on the handle as if he expected one of the relatives to lunge for it before he could close it. The moment the heavy door swung shut behind us, the roar of angry voices turned into a muffled, buzzing drone, like wasps trapped behind glass. The hallway was lined with framed photographs of judges, decorated officers, retired attorneys. The carpet under my boots softened our footsteps until it felt like we were walking through a memory instead of a law office. "This way," he said quietly, motioning toward a smaller consultation room at the end of the corridor. I followed, my pulse hammering in my ears loud enough that I barely registered the chill of the air conditioning. My palms were damp, my uniform collar felt too tight. I'd been shot at overseas with less adrenaline than I felt now, walking toward a room with a lawyer who'd just called me someone's granddaughter. He opened the door and held it for me. Inside, a small table sat between two leather chairs that squeaked when you moved too quickly. A single window let in a square of pale afternoon light. No witnesses, no audience. Just the two of us, and the questions I'd spent my whole life avoiding. "Please," he said, "have a seat." I sat stiffly, hands folded in my lap, the way I used to in nursing school when I was waiting for an instructor to hand down grades. Mr. Daniels took the chair across from me and set a thin manila file on the table with quiet care. "Sergeant Ellison," he began gently, "I realize this has been unexpected." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's one word for it." He studied my face for a moment, not unkindly. Then he opened the file. On top was a document I recognized instantly, even though I'd only seen it a few times in my life. My birth certificate. Or the version I'd always known. Stripped down. An outline of a story with entire lines missing. Some fields blank, others marked, with a dash as if whoever filled it out had run out of patience. He turned it so it faced me. "This is your birth record," he said. "I believe you've seen it before." I swallowed. My mother always said there were paperwork issues, that it wasn't worth worrying about. His expression softened, but he didn't contradict her. Instead, he slid a second page forward. A photocopy of the same certificate, but this one had notes scrawled along the margins in bold, slanted handwriting I recognized from charts and medication orders. The general's handwriting. Beside the line for child surname, he had written, "Harris." At the bottom, in the same ink, "Find her. Confirm." My stomach tightened. "Why would he have this?" I asked, my voice low. "Because he requested it," Mr. Daniels replied, "through legal channels. As his health declined, he became increasingly certain about something. At first, I'll admit, I was skeptical. Certain about what? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached deeper into the file and pulled out a small, grainy photograph clipped to a personnel form. He slid it to me slowly, like he was handing me something fragile. I knew that face. My mother stared back at me from the page, years younger, hair pulled back, wearing a simple blouse and an expression that was half hopeful, half afraid. Her eyes were the same familiar shade I saw in the mirror every morning. "She served as a civilian nurse on a military base he commanded," Mr. Daniels said quietly, 31 years ago. I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb, my heart lodged somewhere between my ribs and my throat. "She never told me," I whispered. "She never mentioned any of this." He nodded slightly, as if he'd expected that answer. "General Walker requested your mother's personnel file when he was already ill. When he saw her picture, he told me it felt like déjà vu. But it wasn't until he saw you in person that he was sure." "Sure of what?" I asked, the words scraping their way out. He folded his hands. The file opened between us like a small battlefield. "He believed you were connected to him," he said, "by blood." The room seemed to tilt again. I gripped the arm of the chair to steady myself. "Connected how?" Instead of responding directly, he turned another page and showed me an old black-and-white photograph, this time of a teenage girl with long, dark hair and a shy smile. She stood next to a young man in uniform. Both of them were laughing at something outside the frame, their arms looped around each other. On the back, someone had written in neat ink, "Ray and Willow. Summer before deployment." My breath caught. "Who is she?" I asked. "Her name was Willow Spears," he said. "General Walker's older sister." He let the name hang there between us for a moment before continuing. "She had a daughter named Elizabeth," he said. "According to family records, Elizabeth left home young. There was conflict, disagreement. She cut contact. Years later, the general lost track of both of them completely." Elizabeth. I could feel something slamming behind my ribs again. A memory of that hospital bracelet. Not Ellison. Harris. And the way my mother's hands had trembled when she'd taken it from me. "My mother's name was Elise," I said, almost automatically. "That's what she always told me. Elise Carter. She never went by Elizabeth." Your mother used at least 2 surnames in the years following your birth, he replied, his tone calm but firm. Harris and Carter. There are gaps in the records, but there are also patterns, enough for the general to suspect that Elise and Elizabeth were the same person. My fingers dug into my knees. So what are you saying? I asked. That he thought my mother was his niece? Yes, Mr. Daniels said quietly. He believed your mother was Willow's daughter, and that would make you... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. His granddaughter, I said, my voice raw. Yes. I shook my head slowly, as if denial alone could rearrange the evidence on the table. No. My mother said she didn't have family, that it was just us. That family just hurt people. My chest ached. She never said anything about a general or a base or... It's complicated, he interrupted gently. Family histories often are. He reached again into the file and pulled out something small and metallic, a brass key on a worn ring. He set it down beside the photograph of my mother, the metal catching a sliver of light. Before he passed, Mr. Daniels said, the general asked me to give you this. It unlocks a storage trunk in his home, something he kept for decades. My gaze locked on the key. It looked ordinary, dull metal, a bit scratched, the teeth slightly worn, but it felt like it had more weight than the entire binder. What's inside? I asked. He gave a faint, regretful smile. He didn't tell me. He just said you would understand when the time came. I stared at the key without touching it. Why didn't he say anything to me? I whispered. If he believed, why not tell me while he was alive? Mr. Daniels exhaled as if he'd been expecting that question. He didn't want to burden you without proof, he said. He knew the risks of being wrong, especially with a family as contentious as his. He also knew your mother left for a reason. He suspected it was to protect you. He didn't want to tear apart whatever life she'd built. Images flickered through my mind. The general watching me too closely during rounds, the way he sometimes asked oddly specific questions about my childhood, the way his eyes softened when I talked about my mother, then shuddered again like he'd stepped too close to something dangerous. He treated me like a nurse, I said. Nothing more. That was intentional, Mr. Daniels replied. He wanted to see who you were when you thought no one was watching. Not as an heir, not as a walker, just as yourself. The buzzing in my ears grew louder. I looked down at the documents, my incomplete birth certificate, my mother's younger face, the photo of Willow and the general, the note in his handwriting. Find her. Confirm. What happens now? I asked. That, he said, nodding toward the key, is up to you. There are more documents you haven't seen. Records the general kept. That trunk at his house, it holds the rest of the story, or at least his version of it. I hesitated, then reached out. The brass felt warm against my fingers, as if 100 unanswered questions had been heating it from the inside for years. I closed my hand around it until the edges pressed dense into my skin. I thought of my mother's note, forgive yourself, forgive me, keep going. And for the first time, I wondered if keep going meant walking straight into the truth she'd spent her life running from. I want to see it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I want to see his house. I want to open that trunk. Mr. Daniels nodded once, a small, solemn bow. I'll arrange it, he said. As I stepped back into the hallway, the distant voices of the angry relatives swelled again behind the closed conference room door. I tightened my grip on the key. For 34 years, my life had been built on missing pieces and careful silences. Now, I was about to open the box they'd all been trying to keep shut. Mr. Daniels arranged the visit for the next morning, but I barely slept the night before. I lay awake staring at my ceiling, the brass key resting on my nightstand like a single accusing eye. Every time I drifted toward sleep, my thoughts yanked me back. Images of my mother clutching that hospital bracelet, the general's handwriting curling beside my stripped-down birth certificate, the photograph of Willow smiling with the same tilted chin I saw in my mirror. By sunrise, I felt hollowed out, running on instinct more than rest. The general's house sat on the outskirts of town, where the roads narrowed and the trees grew tall enough to knit the sky into patches. When I turned onto the long gravel driveway, the tires of my truck crackled over the stones. The house rose ahead of me, 3 stories of weathered stone and deep brown wood, wide porches, tall pillars, and 2 massive oak trees, spreading their arms like guardians. Even in the quiet, the place felt alert, like it watched anyone who approached. The flag on the porch was still at half-mast. I parked beside an immaculate sedan that definitely didn't belong to me and stepped out. Before I reached the door, it opened. Mrs. Avery, the General's longtime housekeeper, 60-something, silver hair pinned neatly back, posture straight as a ruler, stood there with her hands clasped in front of her. She looked at me with the kind of expression that makes you feel seen and judged and understood all at once. "You came," she said softly. "He wanted me to," I replied. She nodded and stepped aside. "Come in. I'll take you to the room." The house smelled faintly of furniture polish, old paper, and something older, cedar maybe, or memory. The foyer was lined with portraits of commanders and generals, and among them were photos I recognized from the law office, the general alongside presidents, shaking hands with foreign leaders, receiving medals. But here there were more personal ones too. Summer picnics, crowded Christmas dinners, him younger, laughing with people whose faces I didn't know. None of Willow, none of my mother, not a single trace of the women whose names were now rearranging my entire life. Mrs. Avery led me through corridors that twisted like the interior of a memory. She paused only once, outside a closed door on the second floor. "He spent most of his time here at the end," she said, "sitting, thinking. Some days he didn't speak at all. Other days he talked like every word was a race against time." She opened the door. The memory study was small compared to the rest of the house, dimly lit, with a single wide window overlooking the backyard trees. Dust floated in the pale light drifting in, turning the air into a soft haze. A writing desk stood by the wall, its surface neat except for a stack of sealed envelopes tied with twine. Bookshelves lined one side of the room, filled with volumes on history, military ethics, genealogy, books about making sense of the past. And against the far wall sat a cedar trunk with a brass lock. My heartbeat thudded so loudly I half expected Mrs. Avery to hear it. "That's it," she said quietly. "He wouldn't let anyone touch it, not even me." I walked toward the trunk as if approaching something alive. The brass key was warm in my palm, as if my grip had fused it to my skin. Kneeling beside the trunk, I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click, a sound that felt like the first breath after drowning. I lifted the lid. The scent of cedar rose in a wave, clean, sharp, achingly familiar. And inside lay neatly stacked papers, notebooks, and a thick binder with a handwritten label. W. Spears Family. My breath hitched. I lifted the binder first. It was heavier than I expected. Inside were organized files, photographs, letters, decades of history sorted by hand. The earliest documents belonged to a young woman with long, dark hair and kind eyes. Willow Spears, my grandmother. There were photographs of her as a child, laughing beside a much younger Raymond Walker, before life turned him into the stern, stoic man I knew only in illness. There were pictures of them sitting on a porch swing, arms looped, faces split into wide smiles. One photo had writing on the back, "Ray and Willow, summer before deployment." I ran my fingers over their faces, the old paper soft beneath my fingertips. The next file was labeled Elizabeth. My mother. My throat closed. I had never seen these photographs. My mother as a baby, blurry, tiny fists curled, as a toddler clinging to Willow's leg. As a teenager, her smile soft and uncertain, the same shape of eyes as mine. Every page deepened the ache in my chest. Under the photos were letters, dozens of them, all written by Willow to the general. I picked up one with trembling hands. "Raymond, your brother came again. He said terrible things, said he would take Elizabeth away, said she belongs with the real family. I won't let him." My breath froze. "Your brother." The same man who had snarled at me in the will reading. The man whose eyes burned with possession, not grief. I opened another letter. "We are leaving soon. I don't know where yet, only that it must be far. Please understand. I can't let him get near her." My pulse skittered painfully. A third letter bore creases so deep it looked like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. "I've changed our names. We are starting over. I know you'll be angry, but I must protect her. If he finds us, he will take her." I stared at the signature. Willow. I sank back on my heels. The trunk blurred as tears filled my eyes. My mother hadn't run from family because she hated them. She had run because she was hunted. Because someone in this house, someone sitting in that conference room yesterday shouting that I didn't belong, had tried to claim her like property. She ran to save herself. She ran to save me. My vision blurred again as I reached for the last envelope in the stack. Tear stains smudged the ink. "Raymond, she's pregnant. She's scared. She refuses to let you help. She won't come home. She believes your brother will try to claim the baby. She won't say it, but she's thinking of running again. I don't know what to do. The date was 1 month before I was born. I pressed the letter to my chest and bowed my head. A gentle hand touched my shoulder. I didn't realize Mrs. Avery had stepped closer. He loved your grandmother, she said softly. Losing her broke something in him. Losing track of your mother shattered the rest. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered. Why leave all this tucked away in a trunk? Because he wasn't sure, she said. Not until you walked into his room for the first time. You looked like Willow, and you cared for him like she used to. My throat tightened. At the bottom of the trunk lay a small velvet box. I lifted it slowly. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a leaf-shaped pendant. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, Elizabeth, my mother's first name, my birth name. A sob rose in my throat and broke loose before I could stop it. I clutched the necklace to my chest, feeling the fragile metal warm under my palm. The pieces of my life, every missing answer, every torn thread, every silence, were here in this trunk. My mother hadn't abandoned me. She had protected me, and the truth hurt more than the lies ever had. When I finally closed the lid, the cedar scent lingered in the air like a last embrace. I left the general's house with the pendant around my neck and the binder pressed to my side. The sky outside was a flat sheet of gray, the air sharp with cold. By the time I reached Mr. Daniels' office, the general's relatives were already shouting. The moment I stepped inside, the voices sharpened. "There she is!" one of the nephews barked, jabbing a finger at me. "The gold digger! You manipulated him! You tricked a dying old man! She wasn't family, she was just the nurse." I didn't flinch this time. I set the binder on the table and opened it to the first photo. Willow and Raymond, arms looped, smiling, young, whole. The room fell silent. "This," I said, my voice steady, "was your aunt, and this was her daughter." I turned the page. The letters spilled out. The truth, for the first time, had a voice. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The letters lay across the polished table like scattered evidence from a crime scene, each one a piece of a story the family had spent decades burying. I picked up the first letter, the one where Willow warned that the general's brother had threatened to take Elizabeth, and read it aloud, my voice steady even though my hands trembled. He said he would take Elizabeth away, said she belongs with the real family. We have to leave. A few of the relatives blanched. One woman pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, but the loud nephew, the one who had called me a gold digger, snorted loudly. "This proves nothing," he spat. "Anyone could have written those letters." Without a word, I lifted the pendant from around my neck and turned it so the engraving caught the overhead light. "Elizabeth." "This," I said quietly, "belonged to my mother, the woman your family chased out of this house, the woman who had to change our names to keep me safe." The nephew stepped forward, face red. "Your mother abandoned this family. She chose to disappear. No," I cut in, my voice low but sharp enough to slice through his accusation. "She was running from you." He froze. I flipped to the next letter, the one where Willow wrote about changing their names. Then the final one, tear-stained, where she confessed my mother was pregnant and terrified. I read that one word for word. When I finished, the room was dead silent. "She ran because you wanted to claim her child like a prize," I said, meeting each of their eyes one by one. "She ran because she knew none of you cared about her, just about bloodlines, inheritance, leverage. She ran because she wanted to keep me safe." The nephew shook his head, but his voice cracked. You can't know that." I closed the binder softly. "I don't have to know. She told you herself, in every one of those letters. You just refused to hear her." Mr. Daniels stepped forward, placing a folder on the table with deliberate calm. "And if there is any doubt," he said, "the general ordered a DNA test months before he died. His results matched Sergeant Ellison. He waited for confirmation before finalizing his will." Gasps broke through the room. The older woman, who had been shaking earlier, let out a quiet, choked sob. "That's impossible," the nephew whispered, though it sounded more like he was trying to convince himself. Mr. Daniels slid the test results toward him. "This is undeniable." The nephew stared down at the paperwork, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "And as for the will," Mr. Daniels continued, his tone turning firmer, "it is fully valid. Every page documented, every condition followed. Legally, Sergeant Ellison is the rightful heir. There will be no successful contest." The nephew snapped his head up. He was old. He was confused. She manipulated him. I finally spoke again, softly, but with a steadiness I didn't know I had until now. "I didn't manipulate him," I said. "I cared for him when no one else did." I looked at each of them, letting the truth sit heavy in the air. You called me just the nurse, I continued. But I held his hand when he was afraid. I talked to him when he felt alone. I listened when no one else bothered to show up. Their faces tightened. Shame, anger, disbelief, all swirling in uneasy silence. You want revenge? I asked quietly. Here it is. He loved me. He trusted me, not because of blood, but because of who I am. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Truth spoken calmly hits harder than screaming ever could. You failed him, I said, not the other way around. The nephew's expression twisted, but he couldn't find words. The older woman sank into a chair, covering her face with both hands, as silent tears slid through her fingers. One by one, the rest of the relatives left the room, some muttering, some stunned, some looking at the floor instead of me, unable to make eye contact. When the last door closed behind them, I finally breathed. Not triumph, not victory, just exhaustion, relief, and the faintest spark of something like closure. Mr. Daniels exhaled heavily and sat across from me. You handled that, he said, with more grace than I've seen in 30 years of estate work. I don't feel graceful, I admitted. I feel empty. That's normal, he replied softly. Truth shakes us before it settles. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a navy blue envelope, thick and sealed with wax. My full name, both versions, was written in the general's firm handwriting. To Maeve Elizabeth Ellison. Seeing both names together sent a rush of emotion through me, so sharp, it almost knocked the air from my lungs. Mr. Daniels slid the envelope gently across the table. This was his final request, he said. He wrote it 3 days before he passed. I stared at it, afraid, grateful, unsteady, hungry for answers, terrified of them too. My fingers hovered over the wax seal. This letter, I knew, would change everything again. And I wasn't sure whether it would break me or finally put me back together. I swallowed hard, lifted the envelope. I broke the seal with my thumb. The wax cracked softly, too softly, for something that felt like it carried the weight of an entire lifetime. Inside was a thick sheet of paper, the edges slightly curled, as if the general had held it more than once before letting it go. His handwriting, shaky but unmistakably his, filled the page. My dearest Elizabeth. It was strange seeing that name, my birth name, written there, the name my mother hid, the name I didn't even know belonged to me until yesterday. My throat tightened before I'd even read the next line. I know you prefer Maeve. That is the name your mother chose, and it is the name I came to love. But you were born Elizabeth, and I hope someday you can carry that name without pain. I pressed my palm against my chest, steadying myself. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the truth has found you. I prayed that it would come to you gently, but I fear that truth rarely shows mercy. If it has caused you pain, then I am sorry. If it has brought you answers you deserve, then I am grateful. My eyes blurred. I blinked hard. Your grandmother and I were stubborn people. We let pride turn one argument into a canyon. She felt I'd lost myself to money and status. I believed she was ruining her life by running from the family. We were both wrong, and our stubbornness cost us decades. He paused in the letter there, the ink slightly heavier, as if he'd stopped, collected himself, and continued only when he found the strength. When the agency sent your photograph before your interview, I felt something I had not felt in years. Hope. You had Willow's eyes, her quiet courage, her steadiness. My chest ached reading that. I asked questions quietly. I moved slowly, carefully. I did not want to disrupt the life your mother had built. She did what she had to do, and I understand that now. She was protecting you from a family that had lost its way. He was talking about his brother, about the man who had screamed at me yesterday, who had tried to yank my mother back like she was property, who had nearly torn our lives apart before they began. You cared for me when I was at my worst. You laughed with me on the days when my old bones didn't feel like failing me. You never treated me like a man with money. I watched you work with patience, kindness, dignity. I wanted to see who you were when you believed no one was watching. You showed me who you are. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, but the tears kept coming. I am proud of you. Proud in a way I never had the chance to be for your mother. Proud in a way I wish I had told you in person. I inhaled sharply. No one had ever said those words to me. Not like that. What I've left you is not a reward. It is not meant to change you. It is meant to protect your goodness and to give your dreams a chance to take shape. I know about the clinic you want to build. I know you have a heart for those who have nothing. Your grandmother would be proud. Your mother would be proud. And I am proud, more than words can say. I had told him about my dream only once, during a late-night conversation when he couldn't sleep because the pain in his ribs wouldn't quiet. I'd told him about wanting to open a small clinic for families who couldn't afford care, especially seniors who had no one. I'd thought he'd forgotten. He hadn't. One final request, my dear. Do not let the bitterness of others shape who you become. They have lived chasing money. You must live chasing meaning. That is the real inheritance. I stopped reading, closed my eyes, let the quiet sink into me. Then I read the last lines. Whatever name you choose, Maeve or Elizabeth, carry it with honor. You are the bridge between what our family was and what it could have been. You are my legacy. With all my love, your Uncle Raymond. When I lowered the letter, I realized Mr. Daniels was waiting silently across from me, giving me the dignity of time. It's a lot, I whispered. It is, he agreed gently, but you're handling it better than most. I don't feel like I'm handling anything, I said. I feel like I'm standing on a bridge that wasn't there yesterday. Perhaps that's exactly what he hoped you'd feel. I folded the letter with slow, careful movements, as though it were something sacred. Then I slipped it back into the envelope and held it tightly in both hands. What do I do now? I asked. Mr. Daniels let out a soft breath, as if he'd been waiting for that question. You begin with a choice, Yum, he said. What do you want to do with the estate? Estate. A word that felt too big to sit comfortably in my chest. The house, the land, the accounts, the $12 million. It was all mine. A weight heavier than grief settled against my ribs. Not the burden of money. Money could be used, directed, reshaped. But the burden of legacy, of meaning, of honoring people who had loved me in different, imperfect ways. I thought of my mother, working double shifts, coughing from cleaning chemicals, holding me close when I cried. I thought of the general, gruff, stubborn, quietly observant, the way he sometimes squeezed my hand when words failed him, the way he had kept Willow's letters for decades. I thought of the trunk, the pendant, the letters stained with tears older than I was. My voice broke, but I didn't stop. I think I know what he would have wanted me to do. Mr. Daniels nodded, as if he already knew. Then, he said, let's begin. It took months. Months of walking through the abandoned mansion with a notebook in one hand and a tape measure in the other. Months of contractors walking through hallways that used to hold secrets. Months of planning, arguing, designing, rebuilding. The grand dining room became a waiting area, bright, open, welcoming. The old parlor became an exam room. The ballroom, with its soaring ceiling and echoes of long-forgotten galas, became a physical therapy center. And the library, the room where he'd spent countless hours thinking, became my office. I kept his desk exactly where it was, facing the window, watching the world. We named it the Raymond Walker Community Health Center. When the doors opened, the first patient to walk in was a young mother with 2 children. One of them had a cough so deep I felt it in my own chest. The mother apologized again and again for not being able to afford a doctor sooner. You're here now, I said gently. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Word spread quickly. Seniors came, some with walkers, some with trembling hands. Veterans arrived with stiff shoulders and tired eyes. Families came in clusters, hesitant at first, then grateful. Every day I walked the halls, hearing laughter in rooms that once held only silence, seeing hope where there once was distrust. And slowly, piece by piece, I felt something healing inside me too. One afternoon, as the clinic buzzed with life, Mrs. Avery appeared in my doorway. Maeve, she said softly, there's someone here asking for you. You might want to speak with him. I stepped into the foyer and froze. Standing there, hat in hand, shoulders slumped, was the general's nephew, the loudest, angriest one from the will reading. He looked smaller now, less certain, more human. I hope it's okay that I came, he said awkwardly. I heard what you did with the place. I wanted to see it. I didn't move, didn't speak, just watched him. He swallowed. Look, I was awful to you. We all were. I grew up hearing the story one way, that your grandmother abandoned us, that your mother was ungrateful, that you were no one. When Uncle Ray changed the will, I felt cheated. He paused. But I was wrong. His voice cracked barely, just enough for me to hear it. This place, he whispered, looking around. He would have loved this, more than the money, more than anything. I let out a slow breath. Maybe forgiveness wasn't loud. Maybe it was quiet. Maybe it was choosing to see someone as more than their worst moment. Would you like a tour? I asked. His eyes softened with gratitude. Yeah, he said, I'd like that. We walked through the clinic together. And somehow, step by step, a bridge began forming between us. Slow, fragile, but real. Months later, on a warm spring evening, I locked up the clinic and drifted toward the garden behind the house. The sky was a soft blaze of orange and pink, and a breeze carried the faint scent of cedar. I stopped beside the bench where the general liked to sit during his good days. I hope I'm doing right by you, I whispered. I hope Mom sees it too. A gust of wind rustled the leaves overhead, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a ghost passing through. It felt like a blessing. I pressed the pendant to my heart. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. Family wasn't blood. It wasn't a name on a certificate. It wasn't who claimed you or who ignored you. Family was kindness offered freely, love chosen deliberately, legacy built with compassion, not wealth. My revenge had never been about hurting anyone. It was about proving that goodness survives, even when everything tries to bury it. And now I knew that was the kind of inheritance worth passing on. Before you go, I'd love to hear something from you. Have you ever uncovered a family secret or learned something that changed how you saw your past? If you feel comfortable, share it in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear. Thank you for staying with me. There are more stories ahead, stories of courage, healing, and the families we build along the way.